very fortunate to have one of the legends of frame building here with us. We have Tom Ritchey, and to get a chance to witness Tom do what Tom does best. So, Tom, thank you very much for coming up to the show, and thank you for doing this.
And thank you for the show for making this possible and doing something unique. I think it's been a long time in the back of my mind that we would do something like this at a hand-built show, because that's what it's all about. Back in the day, when I first started 50 years ago, there was, a handful of us that would say that maybe they could do something. But in the very early years of my building, I basically found myself in a great place, because I was in Silicon Valley before it was called Silicon Valley. I was surrounded by engineers that were of all makes and all different kinds, including my father and Job Brandt. And for the most part, unfortunate to cycling, the constraints of conformity were controlled 6,000 miles away in Europe. The way in which the world thought at that time, and the way that cyclists were limited and hampered, and really, kind of opposite of the way that I was thinking. Of course, I was 15 when I built my first frame, but the seeds of this rebelliousness in a teenager came a year before that, when I wanted a good bike, and I believed the press about the Europeans building the best bikes, and I had the opportunity to buy a Cinelli for $50, a frame set. The only problem is that Cinelli was broken, and it was worthless until someone said, "I think I can fix that." People said, "I've got a broken Ron Cooper. I've got a broken Bob Jackson. I got a broken Mozzie. Can you repair this? It needs a down tube. It needs a fork blade. It needs a chainstay. It needs a seat tube. It's got a broken seat mast." You name it. People came out of the woodwork before I even built my first frame, and they needed it repaired. And so I got the chance. Once you peel back the layers of paint and chrome, and you heat it up, or you try to extricate the tube from it and replace it with another piece of tubing, you really see what the quote masters and their skill level truly was. And as a 15-year-old or 14-year-old, when I first did that to a Cinelli, I realized that the emperors really didn't have much clothing on. But there was very few of us. There was very few of us that had ever tried to repair a frame, and to see what was in it, see how it was made, and see how poor the mitering was, or how poor the brass penetration was, or how hot everything must have been. The masters were building out of Europe with these materials, the same materials that I was finding and using. And a little punk kid came along and said, "Why are you doing it that way?" You pass that around. When you peer inside the inside of a tube, and you see nothing but charred black residue, do you realize that the amount of heat was at a blast furnace level? If you have a chance to look at that, I didn't use probably half the heat as far as just the temperature density of a normal joint that would be done in a factory. That had no flux on it other than my fluxer, by the way. This is like a secret little thing that went away in the last 50 years. There's very few of these that are out there, but it basically helps you control your temperature. You have to use a torch differently too. It's a way to braze that is a production thinking way to braze. The real value is that you use a smaller orifice on your tip is very small orifice, but you use a lot of flow. The best I can explain it is you're TIG welding with a torch. And if you're a good TIG welder, you know how hard it is to do it right. In the same way, anyone can braze, but to do it right, you have to do it differently. It's somewhat of a hand show because I'm using gravity all the time. Basically, you have to get the material, the majority of the material. You have to choose the amount of material, not necessarily in a perfect way, but then you have to shape it. That's a two-pass process. So the first pass is just get the material on there without burning anything up. And the second pass is carving it. And it's really carving it with the benefit of gravity.
You always use your lap for that?
Legs, lap, foot, everything. Every piece, every which way gymnastics needs to go, I go. And especially if you're doing it with a tandem, you would not believe it. It's like, sometimes I'm like here, you know. But that's you have to seek the benefit of gravity at all times. So you can't braze in a stand. You have to tack in a stand, and you have to braze in a way that you can work gravity the whole time. You know, when you're lighting your flame, you really won't notice it. It's when you crack it. Now it becomes a little bit on the bright side, so it's really hard to see where your cone is. You got to bring your cone back in. A lot of times people will over acetylene because they won't be able to see the cone. You can really only see the cone. It's basically not how large the cone is, how hot I can get it. By a gas fluxer runs cooler. So in order to benefit from it, in order to use it, you have to push a lot more acetylene through it. So another thing that for me, along the lines of you guys that are frame builders, it's really important to have a small torch. So they don't make these anymore. Well, they do, but this is an aerolite. As you can see, this has been through a lot of heat. I've beat this with a hammer many, many, many times over. So just doing that, there's a thought process to that. You know, to first start doing it, it takes a little bit, but the main thing is you don't want the brass to drop. You want to keep moving it. The other thing I didn't say is there's very few moments where you're actually brazing straight on, like right here. Now this is one because I'm going into a V shape. So keep in mind, I'm looking for a way to penetrate into the center. And as soon as you start to see it start to puddle and lose and become somewhat in liquid form and drop down my shoe, I'm deflecting. I'm doing this all the time.
They didn't even preheat anything at all. You just went straight into it.
Yeah. So that's because it's a piece of thin wall tubing. So basically, right now I've done the first pass. Okay. Now, what you want to do is you want to keep going the direction that it has the least amount of heat. And you're right at the point where it's dropping away. There's a gravity monster that's wanting to come into play. And I'll just take a second, and you can see basically how quick that was and how almost net. I mean, this was my first one in a while. That one's, you see now, if you don't do this right, if you don't do it in the right flow and the right heat, you're trying to fight, just like in TIG welding, you're trying to fight that shrink mark. You can keep pushing the shrink mark to the point that you won't want to see it until you get back on the other side. So this is a little bit of a dilly-dally now that I've stopped, but if you can imagine, you're basically taking puddles, stretching them out.
And you're kind of wicking it with the torch, but you're relying more on the gravity just to like heat it up and then
Both.
the gravity.
Both. It's a combo. You just have to get comfortable with what you're playing with. So now it's beautiful. Right now it's a perfect time to see this. But if you were to see that in a sunlit environment, you won't appreciate it. But right now, the temperature of the brass is right at the melting temperature. So you're at 1600 degrees in order to braze this way. If you were brazing a lug, you would be at least at 1800 degrees, just because you're trying to penetrate. Everything would be on a completely higher level of heat effect. What I was trying to do as a young frame builder is I was aware of the term hydrogen embrittlement. The hotter it gets, the more hydrogen embrittlement, which means the extraction of the original strength of the material. So your specs might show 100,000 psi on chromoly. But after you apply heat to it and the amount that it takes to build a frame, build a traditional frame with lugs, you would be at a 10% reduction in strength. So in my small 16-year-old mind, I was saying, I want all the strength I can get because I want to build a 10% lighter frame. If you learn to braze that way, if you fight I didn't have anyone looking over my shoulders. I didn't have anyone telling me how to do this. And that was an advantage. No one was fillet brazing. No one was doing it this way. I'm almost glad that I didn't have anyone telling me how to braze, because they would have told me don't braze that way. So if you're welcome to come in close, if you can see it. It's really bright. You probably need a pair of sunglasses or something. But you see, my leg is starting to get hot. And what you've got is a tight little, crude. This is the crude beginnings right here. And so basically, you're trying to deflect. You're trying to use gravity. You don't care about penetration. The fillet is all on the outside. It's not. Don't worry about it on the inside. If anything, it's a big mistake putting something on the inside, because then it'll start as a bubble, a drop, and then you'll end up with a problem, which is going to be something inside your tube that you don't want, that's going to rattle around, and your customer is going to go, something's wrong with my bike. Just take this into account. Think about this. My cone is actually buried into that puddle. That's how close I am. And the average person is out here. There's just no way you can control it. So in order to get the benefit from the shaping and the heat intensity, you got to be right there. You got to be pushing it right into, and it's just, now it's a race. It's off to the races. This is like how fast you can finish this, how fast you can get in and out and do the work is the quality of the joint. It's not how slow you are, it's how fast you are.
How much different is your technique, like if you were to do like a really thin wall main triangle?
Same, nothing different.
Nothing different?
Nothing different, yeah. since I stopped, I kind of lost my heat in the area. I've got to go back and I kind of have to recreate it. But basically, this is now somewhat of a cruder joint because I stopped. But as you can see, everything, so that the brass will go where gravity and the way that you're directing the heat. This isn't turning out quite as nice as the other one, but it'll finish up real quickly. The most important thing is that, see, I think I'm a little hot on my adjustment in my tip. So if I come back and I go back and I pull it in a little bit, I'll be okay. All right, so basically I kind of saved it, but it's anyway, the reason why I fumbled this is that it got too hot in my hand and I couldn't hold it. Anyway, that's my excuse. Just as kind of a continuum of my learning process, you know, kind of the way that I was developing as a builder and as a designer of things. I realized if you have transitions that are flowing, like what you see with fillet braise, if there is not interrupted by lugs and other things, thin, thick areas, you're going to have a better, longer lasting frame. Part, period.
Calling it a day, or you can keep on going?
No, I'm gonna call it a day. I think this is